For this assessment, we've enabled some features you may not normally use. As an example, we're looking at here the agreement screen. This is typically used in high-stakes assessments or compliance-based assessments where you want the respondents to agree to certain terms or at least acknowledge that they've read or understood something you've presented to them. In this case, we've presented assessment rules of conduct. We've also included a link to the conduct rules if they'd like to download or print them. In your case, you can also include images or video if you'd like. This is an optional screen. It is not required that you use this screen to create an assessment in Brillium, but we provided it here to give you an example of some of its capabilities. Now, before we move on, I want to point out the 5 phases of the assessment you see at the top of the screen. Of course, we're currently in the agreement phase. Now, if you chose not to use that, that would not be displayed at the top of the screen. The next phase is the login phase. Typically, this will present the information that's been passed from an LMS or an HRIS system to Brillium. But in some cases, you may have respondents self-register, and that's what we'll be doing with this example. But normally, that information will automatically be passed into Brillium through a variety of different ways. The third phase is the assessment phase. This is where respondents will be answering the questions in the assessment. The fourth phase is the summary phase. This is where you present the score or any other related information at the end of the assessment. Finally, we have the review phase. This is another optional screen that you can present at the end of the assessment. This gives you the opportunity to present your questions, the respondent answer choices they've selected, and any correct or incorrect explanations if you like. Okay, let's click Agree and move on. Here we see the assessment login screen. This is where we'll enter respondent information. It essentially is your place to capture any demographic information that you want to use on the reporting side at the end of the assessment process. So it's important here to capture any information that we'll want to use to filter some of the data on the reporting side. As I mentioned previously, typically this information will get passed directly into Brillium, but we'll be entering it manually here so I can point out some features that we've selected for this particular assessment that might be of interest to some. So I've entered some of the information for this particular respondent, and we've come to a drop-down called Sales Region. Now, in this case, the sales region, we've entered a number of different locations that we have. This has a related drop-down list under the field Supervisor. If you look at it, the Supervisor lists 2 names. These are also related to the Northeast Sales Region. It's what we call a dependent drop-down list. If we choose Northwest, we'll see different names altogether. We'll choose Carl Knox, and we'll enter a supervisor email. In Brillium, there's some features that allow a supervisor to receive some results rather than the assessment author or administrator. This is extremely helpful if we're using this for some type of training or guidance material in which a supervisor will work directly with employees. Now, we call this supervisor, but it also could be a location manager or someone responsible for a specific geographic location if you're working globally. So we've entered our information, and I want to point out the bottom of the screen. There's a warning here. Now, you can reword this message any way you want, but what it's telling us is that this is a timed assessment, and the clock will start clicking once people log into the assessment. We're going to see one more screen to follow here where we present some instructions. You have an option in Brillium to start the timer when you present any instructions to the assessment or upon the first page of questions. In this case, we've started it at the very first page of instructions to kind of show you how the timer works. We'll click Login and move to the next screen.